He arrived at the cultural center every morning long before anyone else. The streets were still quiet, the sun just beginning to rise, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. He carried a small bag with his few belongings and a broom that had seen better days. People walking past him never paid attention. To them, he was just another worker, one of the many who cleaned and tidied up so that the artists could shine inside the hall. The floors gleamed under the soft lights, but dust and crumbs always seemed to find a way to settle again. He worked quietly, moving slowly but carefully, sweeping every corner, wiping every surface, making sure nothing was out of place. His movements were almost invisible to the busy artists who hurried around, carrying instruments, sheet music, and the weight of their own importance. No one looked at him twice. Even though no one noticed, he was not entirely alone. There was a piano in the corner of the hall, old and slightly damaged, with scratches on its surface and a few keys that didn't work quite right. Most people avoided it, thinking it useless, but he could not. He had always been drawn to it. Every day, while cleaning, he would pause for a few moments, resting his hands on the keys, imagining the music that could come from them. He didn't know if anyone would ever hear him play, but he dreamed of it silently, secretly, deep inside. It was not that he had no skill. On the contrary, he had learned in secret, using an old, nearly broken piano in a small room at home. His neighbors had laughed sometimes when they heard him practicing, thinking it was just a hobby for a quiet boy. But he had poured his heart into it, learning every note, every rhythm, every melody that touched him. Music was his escape, his friend, and his secret world. The artists who filled the hall were nothing like him. They were confident, polished, and proud, talking loudly about competitions, awards, and concerts. They rarely noticed him, except when he got in their way. They didn't care about the quiet boy in the corner. To them, he was invisible, a shadow moving among the bright lights of their glamorous world, but that invisibility suited him. He liked to watch from the edges, studying how they moved, how they played, how they lost themselves in music. He learned from them without ever speaking a word. There was a strange comfort in being unseen. No one expected anything from him. No one judged him. And in that freedom, he found the courage to dream. On this particular morning, the hall was busy with preparations for a special evening performance. The air was tense with anticipation. Musicians argued over notes, their instruments needed tuning, and the director walked back and forth, checking every detail. The boy moved silently among them, sweeping under chairs and tables, collecting stray papers, making sure nothing would ruin the performance. He kept his eyes on the floor, but his mind was elsewhere, imagining the music flowing from the piano he could barely touch. Sometimes, when the hall was empty for a moment, he would pause, gently resting his fingers on the keys, pressing them softly, almost as if he were afraid of making a sound. Even a small note made him smile, though he quickly went back to his cleaning when someone came near. The piano became his secret, a hidden part of his life that no one else knew about. The director, busy and impatient, never spoke to him except to give orders. "Make sure this floor shines," he would say, or "don't leave a speck of dust behind." There was no praise, no encouragement, only the routine of work and silence. Some of the musicians noticed him occasionally, but only to ignore him afterward. He had learned to fade into the background, to do his job without complaint, without drawing attention. Yet, despite being overlooked, he carried himself with quiet dignity. He worked with care, as though each movement mattered. Even the smallest act, polishing a chair, picking up a stray piece of paper, felt like a contribution to something bigger. The music he loved was in the air, in the walls, in the way the hall waited silently for the performers. And he, though invisible, was part of that world. As the sun rose higher, the hall grew brighter and the sounds of preparation grew louder. The boy moved through the chaos with calm precision, a quiet observer among the flurry of activity. The piano waited for him, old and imperfect, yet full of potential. It called to him in a way that no one else could hear. One day, he told himself, he would play. One day, someone would hear the music he had kept locked in his heart for so long. Until then, he swept, wiped, polished, and carried on. Invisible, silent, unnoticed, but dreaming. The day seemed like any other, with the usual chaos of the rehearsal hall. Musicians rushed in and out, tuning their instruments, flipping through sheet music, and practicing sections of their pieces. The boy moved quietly among them, carrying his broom and bucket, picking up the small messes left behind. He was careful to stay out of the way, but the director's eyes, sharp and impatient, always seemed to find him. Today, the director's mood was worse than usual. His face was tight with frustration, and his voice carried a sharpness that made even the most confident musicians flinch. The boy had noticed it, of course, but he kept sweeping, pretending he didn't hear. He had long learned that no matter what happened, his job was to keep quiet and do his work. At one point, a spilled bag of coffee beans had left a small trail on the polished floor. The director spotted it immediately and snapped, "Who left this mess?" A few musicians shrugged, muttering excuses under their breath. The boy, standing with his broom at the ready, barely moved, but the director's eyes landed on him. "Clean it up," the director barked. "And make it spotless. I don't want to see a single grain left on the floor." His tone was sharp and final. The boy nodded, silent as always. He moved quickly, sweeping the scattered beans into a neat pile, brushing the edges carefully and wiping the floor until it gleamed. The other artists barely noticed him. Some smirked, thinking it was funny how the quiet boy worked so diligently while they argued over notes and tempo. Others ignored him completely, absorbed in their own preparations. As he worked, the boy's eyes kept drifting to the piano in the corner. It sat there silently, worn but waiting. He longed to touch it, to let the music inside him out, but he knew it was not the time. He had no right to sit at it while the artists and director were busy, and he did not dare break the invisible rule that kept him in the background. Then the unexpected happened. The director received a phone call and stepped out of the hall, leaving the room in a sudden, unusual silence. Musicians paused, tuning their instruments and checking their sheet music, unsure of what to do with the unexpected break. The boy's heart began to race. The hall, usually filled with voices, now seemed quiet, almost alive with possibility. He set down his broom carefully and glanced around. No one was paying attention to him, no one except the empty piano waiting for his touch. Slowly, hesitantly, he moved toward it. His fingers hovered over the keys, afraid that even the smallest mistake would betray him. But there was something in the silence that urged him forward. Something that made him want to let go of the years of waiting and hiding. He pressed a key softly, and a warm, trembling note filled the hall. It was small at first, barely audible, but it carried with it a sense of longing, a quiet story of years spent dreaming. Encouraged, he pressed another and then another, building a melody that flowed naturally from his heart, unbeknownst to him. Some of the musicians had returned early from their break. They stopped at the door, frozen in place, listening. The music was unlike anything they had expected. It was gentle but full of power, simple but deeply moving. Their mouths opened slightly in surprise. The boy did not notice them. He was lost entirely in the music, in the story he was telling through each note. Even the director, returning quietly to the hall, froze at the entrance. He leaned against the doorframe, his phone forgotten in his hand, his eyes wide. The boy he had just scolded, the quiet, invisible worker he had barely acknowledged, was playing. And he was playing beautifully. The melody seemed to wrap around the room like a soft blanket, filling the corners with warmth and emotion. Each note spoke of longing, of dreams held quietly, of patience and hope. The director's sharp eyes softened as he listened, realizing that this was no ordinary talent. The boy, invisible to the world for so long, had a gift that demanded attention. For the first time, the boy felt noticed. Not as a worker, not as someone standing in the background, but as a musician, as a storyteller, as someone capable of moving hearts. His fingers danced across the keys, confident now, carrying the music higher and deeper than he had ever dared before. The musicians who had returned early could not move. Some held their instruments in their laps, unsure of what to do. Others whispered to each other, their voices trembling with disbelief. None of them had ever expected the quiet boy to be capable of such mastery, of such emotion. The director, standing silently at the back, felt a mix of awe and regret. He had been so quick to judge, so quick to dismiss. And now he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment that would not be forgotten, a talent that had been hidden under the weight of work and neglect. The boy, unaware of the growing audience, played on. Each note seemed to tell a story of years spent in silence, of nights practicing alone, of dreams nurtured quietly. The music was not just a performance. It was a declaration, a revelation. He had been invisible, but now his voice could be heard through the piano. When the phone call ended and the hall grew completely quiet again, the boy continued, not even pausing to breathe. Every movement was natural, every note intentional. He was no longer the boy who cleaned the floors. He was the boy who spoke through music, who could make people feel what he felt, who could hold their attention without a single word. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, he stopped. The last note lingered in the air, vibrating softly against the walls. The hall was completely silent except for the soft hum of awe and disbelief. Musicians and director alike remained frozen, unsure of how to react. The boy, finally realizing the room was no longer empty, lowered his hands slowly. He did not smile, he did not look around. He only waited, heart still racing, wondering if the director would be angry, if the musicians would mock him. He had broken an unspoken rule, but he had followed his heart. The director took a step forward, slowly, carefully. He did not shout, he did not scold. He simply said, in a voice quieter than the boy expected, "Where did you learn to play like that?" And for the first time, the boy knew that someone was truly seeing him. Not just the work he did, not just the mop he carried, but him. The boy with the quiet heart, the secret dreams, and the hidden music. The boy sat at the piano, his heart still pounding from the shock of being heard. For a moment he felt frozen, unsure if he should continue or stop. But the music inside him would not be silenced. Slowly, almost instinctively, he placed his fingers back on the keys and began again. This time the notes flowed more confidently, more freely. Each key he pressed seemed to carry a piece of his story, the years of quiet work, the nights of secret practice. The moments of longing he had kept locked away in his heart. The hall was silent except for the piano. The musicians who had returned early from their break could only stand frozen, their instruments forgotten in their hands. They exchanged glances, wide-eyed, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The sound that filled the room was not just music. It was emotion made tangible, a language without words, speaking directly to their hearts. Even the director, who had always been sharp and demanding, stood at the back of the hall, completely still. His eyes widened as the melody wrapped around him. He had scolded this boy just moments ago, dismissing him as invisible, as someone who belonged in the shadows. And now he could not believe what he was hearing. Every note was precise yet full of soul, simple yet powerful. The music carried a story of patience, hope, and quiet strength, a story only the boy could tell. The boy did not notice the eyes on him. He was lost in the music, his entire being focused on the piano. The hall seemed to disappear around him. He no longer saw the polished floors, the chairs, or the musicians who watched him. There was only the sound, rising and falling, moving through him and out into the air. His fingers moved with grace and confidence, each note deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was as if the piano itself had come alive, responding to the boy's every touch. The cracked keys, the slightly worn wood, the faded finish, they did not matter. They became part of the story, adding character and depth to the music. The hall, once a place of preparation and tension, had transformed into a stage for something magical, something unforgettable. A few musicians had quietly stepped closer, unable to resist the pull of the music. Their mouths opened slightly in astonishment. Some whispered to each other, though carefully, so as not to break the spell. "Who knew he could play like this?" one said softly. Another shook their head in disbelief. It was hard to imagine that this quiet, unassuming boy, the one they had always ignored, could produce such beauty. The director, watching from the back, felt a rush of emotions. He had been so quick to judge, so ready to dismiss the boy as unimportant. And now he realized he had been wrong. Completely wrong. This was no ordinary talent. This was genius hidden behind humility and hard work. The director could not tear his eyes away. He could only watch, silently wishing he had seen it sooner. The melody grew, rising and falling like waves. The boy's music carried every feeling he had ever held inside: joy, sorrow, longing, hope. Each note seemed to float in the air, touching the hearts of everyone in the room. It was impossible not to feel it, impossible not to be moved. The musicians, who had spent years performing for applause and recognition, found themselves silent, humbled by the raw honesty of the music. The boy's expression did not change much. He remained calm, almost serene, though his heart raced. He did not play to impress anyone. He played because he had to, because the music had waited too long to be silent. It poured from him naturally, effortlessly, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment all along. Time seemed to slow. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The notes continued, carrying the emotions of a lifetime, the dreams of a boy who had been invisible for so long. And then, almost as if guided by instinct, he began to play a part of the melody that was softer, slower, more intimate. The room leaned in, listening. The softer notes were full of vulnerability, a quiet honesty that made the music even more powerful. Some of the musicians felt tears prick their eyes. Others could not believe that such depth could come from someone they had overlooked for so long. The boy had not only played music. He had told a story that everyone understood, even without words. It was a story of patience, of perseverance, of silent strength. It was a story that made them see him for the first time, not as a cleaner, not as a background figure, but as an artist, as someone remarkable. The director felt a lump in his throat. He had seen many performers in his life, many talented people who sought attention and praise. But he had never seen anything like this. The boy, who had quietly cleaned the floors for years, was teaching them all a lesson about talent, humility, and the power of unseen potential. And then, just when the melody reached its peak, the boy's hands moved faster, dancing across the keys with precision and emotion. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of the music. Every note was perfect, every chord filled with meaning. It was as though the piano itself had been waiting for him all these years, and now it could finally speak. When the final note rang out, there was a moment of complete silence. The room held its breath, unable to process what had just happened. The boy's hands hovered above the keys for a few seconds, as if savoring the moment before lowering them gently. He did not smile, did not look around. He only waited, unsure what would happen next, though a small part of him felt a quiet hope. The director stepped forward, slowly, carefully, not wanting to disturb the magic that had just unfolded. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. He spoke softly, almost reverently. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy's heart raced at the question. He had never been asked such a thing, never been recognized in this way. He lowered his eyes, still unsure, and whispered that he had practiced in secret, using an old piano at home. He explained that he had loved music for as long as he could remember, and that cleaning the halls had been the only way to stay close to it. The director listened, nodding slowly, a new respect growing in his heart. He realized that this boy, who had always been overlooked, had a gift unlike any he had ever seen. And in that moment, the boy who had once been invisible became the center of attention. Not through words, not through effort to impress, but simply by being true to his passion. The musicians, too, began to gather around, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and admiration. They no longer saw a quiet cleaner. They saw a true artist, someone who had shared a piece of his soul through music. And in that moment, the boy realized that all the years of patience, all the quiet work, and all the hidden practice had led to this. For the first time, he felt truly seen. Not as a worker, not as someone insignificant, but as someone capable of touching hearts, of creating beauty that others could feel. And though the hall was still filled with people, the boy felt a calm certainty. The music had found its place, and so had he. When the boy finally lifted his hands from the piano, the hall was still. The last note lingered in the air, soft and trembling, as though it was reluctant to leave. For a long moment, no one moved. The musicians, who had spent years performing on stages and in competitions, could only stare in stunned silence. They had expected music, yes, but not this. Not the raw, honest, unforgettable music that seemed to tell the story of a lifetime in just a few minutes. The boy lowered his head slightly, his heart racing. He had played because he had to, because the music inside him would not stay silent any longer. He had not played for applause, for recognition, or to impress anyone. He had played because it was who he was. And now, for the first time, he realized that people were seeing him not just the boy who swept floors, but the boy who had dreamed, practiced, and waited for years in quiet determination. The director was the first to move. He stepped forward slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile magic that still hung in the air. His face was softened, almost unrecognizable compared to the sharp, impatient expression he had worn moments ago. He looked at the boy and spoke, his voice low but filled with awe. That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? The boy hesitated, unsure what to say. No one had ever asked him something like that before. He had been invisible, overlooked, even scolded for as long as he could remember. But now he realized this was his moment, and he quietly explained. He told them how he had learned on a small old piano at home, how he had spent nights practicing in secret, and how he had always loved music more than anything. He spoke of the years he had spent cleaning floors, of the moments he had watched musicians and dreamed of being one of them. As he spoke, the director listened, nodding slowly. There was a deep respect growing in his eyes, a recognition of something rare and precious. He understood now that this boy's talent had been hidden, not because it did not exist, but because no one had taken the time to notice it. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change the boy's life forever. He stepped closer, still watching the boy carefully. You have a gift, he said, his voice steady but warm. A real gift. And it is time someone helped you share it with the world. I want to make sure you get the training and opportunities you deserve. You have waited long enough. The boy's eyes widened. He had never expected such words. He had never imagined anyone taking his dreams seriously, especially not someone like the director who had scolded him just minutes ago. He lowered his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. For the first time he felt truly seen, truly understood, truly valued. Around them, the musicians began to move as well. Some approached slowly, almost tentatively, as though afraid to break the spell of what they had just witnessed. Others clapped softly, their faces full of admiration. They no longer saw a quiet, invisible cleaner. They saw an artist. They saw someone who could move hearts without saying a word. Someone whose music spoke louder than any applause ever could, one of the older musicians. Someone who had performed on grand stages around the world approached the boy. You are remarkable, they said quietly. I have never heard anything like that. You must continue. The world needs to hear you. The boy nodded, overwhelmed. He had spent so long feeling invisible, feeling like his dreams were impossible. And now here were people recognizing him for who he truly was. It was almost too much to take in, but in a good way, a way that made his heart feel lighter than it had in years. The director smiled, a mixture of pride and humility in his expression. We will help you, he said. We will make sure you get the chance to grow, to perform, to share your music with others. You have waited patiently, and now it is time. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he looked around the hall. Everything felt different now. The same hall where he had been invisible, where he had spent countless hours cleaning and dreaming, now seemed alive in a new way. Every corner, every wall, every echo carried the memory of the music he had played, and the possibility of everything to come. He realized something important in that moment. Talent alone was not enough. Patience, perseverance, and quiet dedication had brought him to this point. Years of waiting, years of practicing alone, years of believing in himself even when no one else did. All of it had led to this. And now, finally, he was being given a chance to let the world see what he could do. The musicians, the director, even the janitorial staff who had passed by earlier now looked at him differently. There was respect in their eyes, a quiet awe for someone who had spent years unnoticed yet carried such brilliance within him. He was no longer just a boy with a broom. He was a musician, a storyteller, an artist who had captured their hearts without a single word. In the following days, the boy's life began to change. The director arranged for him to receive formal lessons and gave him opportunities to play in front of audiences who had no idea who he was. The musicians who had once ignored him now watched with admiration as he practiced, offering advice, encouragement, and support. He was no longer invisible. He was part of a world he had dreamed of for so long, and the music that had always lived in his heart could finally be heard. And yet, even as his life changed, the boy remained humble. He never forgot the quiet mornings, the empty halls, the piano in the corner that had waited patiently for him. He continued to work hard, to practice every day, and to play from the heart. Fame or recognition meant little compared to the feeling of music flowing through him. The way it could touch others and connect them to something greater. The hall where it had all begun remained special to him. Every time he returned, he would sit at the piano, close his eyes, and let the music tell its story. The director and musicians often watched, remembering the day that had changed everything, the day a quiet boy with a broom became a musician whom no one would ever forget. It was more than talent, more than practice, more than opportunity. It was the boy's patience, his dedication, and his unwavering belief in the music that lived inside him. It was the reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places. And for the boy who had once been invisible, the music he had carried quietly for so long had finally found its way into the hearts of everyone who listened. The story of that day, of the masterpiece played in an empty hall, became one that people told for years. Not because it was a spectacle, not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Because it reminded everyone that hidden talent can change lives, that patience and hard work are never wasted, and that sometimes all it takes is one moment for the world to finally see what has always been there. And in the center of it all was the boy, who had once only dreamed of music, now living it fully, knowing that the quiet dedication of years had led him to a moment that no one ever would forget.